Hello, welcome to another video of AZ-300 series. The series is about Azure Architect Technologies exam provided by Microsoft, and today, in this third video, we'll be covering Azure overview. My name is Marco, and I will be your guide in this video. Let's begin. First, let's see what have we covered until now. In my first video, I have done some introductions of what can you expect in these series with the newest syllabus that was produced in December 2019, and also how will these videos function and what you can see and expect. In my second video, I have covered some of the tools that you will need to successfully complete this course, something like free Azure accounts, how to set it up, what's needed, some Azure desktop applications, how does Azure platform look like when you log in for the first time, and so on. And in this video, um, this is a natural progression where you'll see just a general Azure overview, meaning more on the history side of things is what do you mean when you say Azure? What is cloud? How is it divided? And what's running at the background of Azure, Microsoft Azure in general. So let's start. When we say today cloud computing, what is that exactly that we mean, and how did this become a cloud, and what are the phases that existed before? So kind of everything started with the traditional data center. It's a building that's located somewhere fairly secure. In order to get into that building, you would either need some access cards, there would be maybe even guards there, and you would have some kind of code. But more importantly, in this particular building, you would have your designated location. It could be also your data center, the entire data center, but it also can be co-located. And in there, you would store your servers, you would store your storage, you would have your networking done, and this is all completely owned by you, and it's your responsibility as well. Somewhere in the late 90s and then early 2000s, a very interesting term started to happen. It's virtualization in the traditional data center. Still, your building, it's still a conventional traditional data center. However, VMware and companies like Citrix or Hyper-V, which is Microsoft in this case, they came up with this virtualization um, idea, and all the servers were being virtualized, which on the other side of things produced faster way of spinning up servers. It was more reliable. You wouldn't waste so much time producing these servers, racking them up, and doing your work basically. And now we come to today. This is where we have cloud and cloud computing. So at the end of the day, it is still a data center, and that data center it's still owned by Microsoft. However, what's important here is who's responsible for what and to what capacity. It's still sitting in Microsoft Data Center, but what I want to cover is some models to see who's responsible for what kind of technology and what's sitting in the back end. So when I said responsibility, so what I want to cover next, and this is very important, especially when you're getting introduced to the terms like IaaS, so infrastructure as a service, platform as a service or PaaS, and then software as a service or SaaS. Uh, this is whole concept of shared responsibility model, and what does that mean, and what are the differences? So most important in the very first one is traditional data center. In traditional data center, you would have obviously some networking, some storage, you would have some physical servers, with virtualization or not, but this is how everything would look like in a traditional data center, and in order for you to use an application, these are all the components that would come into the game. And for all of these components, you would have you or your team responsible for it. And it would require literally physically for you to have and purchase a server, bring it into the data center, unpack it, rack it up, prepare it, break in the system, so-called, spin up an image, and then use it. And then you would also take care of that server, meaning patching the OS, making sure the runtime works properly. You would be also responsible for data and the application running on that server. Then when we move forward, um, when we look at the infrastructure service, you can see now responsibility model kicking in, and certain responsibilities are being shared. And this is now all the infrastructure is sitting in Azure or sitting at the Microsoft data center. And Microsoft is now being responsible for networking, physical part of the thing, networking, storage, your Hyper-V servers, and the virtualization part of it. They are responsible for it, which means they're making sure they're always available. They're making sure they're patched to the newest level. And then every time you need a virtual machine or you need some kind of resource, it is there available for you. The part you are responsible for is the operating system, how the operating system is running, certain middleware in there for your data, for your users. That's what you're responsible for. And then when you say infrastructure as service, what you usually mean by are the virtual machines. This is very similar to virtualization portion when we talked about how the actual data centers have developed themselves throughout the years. This is just sitting in a different data center instead of your traditional data center. So now let's look at a different model. The different model is becoming also very popular these days and going forward. So this is platform as a service, or PaaS model. And as you can see here, the Azure responsibility or Microsoft responsibility of maintaining certain portions of this model increases. So they're now also responsible for operating systems. They're also responsible for runtime. There are a couple of things that you are responsible here for, and that's data, applications, and users. But as a developer in your team, this is what makes them really, really happy, because what they really want to work on is or are applications, and developing those applications and then deploying them. Um, Certain tasks like OS patching can be good to be maintained by you, but it is not really one of the highlights of IT technician's career. So this is a very interesting model. I'm also a huge fan of this, and it's becoming more and more popular um, going forward. Some examples are web applications that are literally a piece of code that you deploy to Azure, also functions. But these are all the things I'm going to be covering much, much later in this series. And then we have a fourth model. This is software as a service model. This is in its entirety managed by Microsoft and by Azure. Even the application part of things, even the data. If you can think about Office 365, this is a typical example of software as a service. The only thing that you're responsible for are users. This is something that Microsoft cannot take away from you, but everything else they're responsible for. Okay, this is the theory part of things. So let's switch gears a little bit, and then let's cover some Azure facts. This is important. It comes up in the test as well from time to time, but it's also very important, I think, when you talk to the customers and then for your own personal knowledge, if you're getting into Azure, just to cover when did Azure became Azure, what was its story. So it was released in February 2010. It was called Windows Azure. It looked much differently than it does today. I think it had 6 basic services. Some of them were storage, absolutely. Some of them were the web applications, or I think they were called websites back then. And it was there to be tested out to see what kind of feedback they're going to get from the community. And then as it progressed in 2014, when it was getting used by a lot of more people, it was renamed to Microsoft Azure in 2014. And then sometime between now and then, in 2017, late 2016, there were so-called two versions of Azure. There was something in between that was called Azure Classic that got moved or upgraded to Azure Resource Manager, or ARM. And it's basically Azure that looks today, because it's set up as infrastructure as code, and Azure Classic was depreciated in early 2017. Um, Currently, as of December 2019, we have 55 regions that are available in the world, and all these regions are divided in multiple phases. I'm going to cover that a little bit later, but in general, we have 55 regions, and these 55 regions are most by any provider, so more than AWS and Google. And these 55 regions, they are divided in two groups. Um, there are public regions, and then there are government regions. Let's see what are the difference between these two. Are there any common elements? And what can you expect when you log in? So let's see the differences between public cloud and government cloud. So first, public cloud, anyone with a credit card can sign up to the public cloud in Azure. You and I, when I was also recording this video, um, when I logged into Azure, um, that was the public cloud. So it has generally available 29 regions that anyone can create their resources in. What that means is all these regions are spread out through the world. Depending where you want to create your virtual machine or your storage, you would create that resource in that region. So if you're sitting in US, you can create one in either China or let's say somewhere in Europe. But keep in mind that the greater the distance from where you are located, the higher the cost is for the latency and for the networking portion. So keep that in mind. Data respects national boundaries. That's very important to keep in mind, especially when you're building certain solutions and when you're dealing with clients from different countries. Um, because Canada data centers, for example, store the data in Canada. France data centers store the data in France. US does store the data in US, and so on. So those boundaries or those countries have different kind of rules of how you deal with data and who can have that access to data. That's something very important to keep in mind. So now when we look at the government cloud, they are, and I'm now specifically talking about the US government cloud, there are multiple government clouds. There is a German government cloud, so this is specifically made for government agencies that work in that country. So there's a German government cloud. I know there's also a government cloud in France as well. I think it might be in India. I'm not quite certain. Um, but in US, we have 8 regions that are currently available for government cloud. Only US governments, so state, local, or federal, can use these government clouds in US. So we have completely separated network to public cloud. So there is no common elements that you can be logged into government cloud and then use data, for example, for public cloud and so on. So there are specific separations and things that are done there that government cloud is not being integrated with the public cloud. Also, there are different versions depending on which government agency is using the cloud. So there are different versions. So there's something for defense government cloud. There's also something for secret government cloud. really varies on what agency is using that government cloud. We'll cover that much later in the series when we will be logging into government cloud and showing some examples there. But keep in mind that not all resources or not all services are generally available in government cloud as they are for public cloud, and this is due to rules, government rules and reasons for either secrecy or um, certain elements that can expose these governments to the public. That's why they're not available. So here's the map that's very easily downloadable, and you can see it being updated, I think, daily or monthly by Microsoft. There are 55 regions worldwide. They're available in 140 countries. Most of the regions are in United States and in Europe. This is just an interesting map to see how much and how fast Azure has grown. Think about it, 10 years ago, they maybe had 2 regions, and now they have 55. So this is an important picture, and this is one of the best examples of how data centers, or what can you see in a data center once you log in, but more importantly, how are your resources being separated, but also how are they being protected from failing. So let's cover the picture a little bit before I go into the actual terms. So what you see here is around the dotted line something says geography. Then within the blue lines you see a regional pair. Uh, that means there are certain regions that are being paired with each other. I'll cover that in more detail in just a little bit, but think about this is if you're, for example, resources are sitting in one region, and if that region fails, what happens then? So Microsoft promises that high availability, if it's set up properly, that your resources will be stood up in a different region that's paired with each other. It means there are direct lines between these regions that are being connected for less latency, obviously. And then in the right-hand side here as well, you see another regional pair between 2 regions. So let's start from the outside. Geography, what does that geography represent? Geography is represented as a country that will host one or more regions. Think about regions sitting in US, Canada, or Germany, France. Geographies typically represent data and compliance boundaries so that Azure customers know what legal and resiliency requirements are honored. So for example, if you would have your data stored in Canada, uh, because of the boundaries and compliance that Canada follows that are slightly different than US, the US government cannot request that data that's sitting in Canada for review. So there are certain boundaries. So for example, US agencies, government agencies cannot have data stored in Canada, for example, or somewhere in Europe. One geography, it's also very important, consists of multiple regions. When you log into Azure, when you set up a region, you will not need to set up geography, but the way how that's represented is there's going to be a country code always before the region, so US East, US West, and so on. So what regions are, um, if you focus now on this a light blue square rectangle, Um, so regions represent one or more data centers which are used to provide Azure services. These data centers within a region are connected through dedicated regional low latency networks. Usually the region is what you will use most frequently when deploying services. Um, these regions, and why is it so important? This is what you choose where you would have your resource group or where you're going to have your resource. Um, it's important to pick the closest region to you uh, because of latency reasons. And also, if you're working with specific services, it's important to know which regions have these services available. So when you're looking for solutions or creating solutions, when you pick one region, to know what's the paired region of that region in case you're setting up your disaster recovery solution or your high availability solution. Each region is always paired with another region within the same geography, such as, for example, within US, you will have something called the US East, and then it paired um, it pair is at least 300 miles away. It will be in US West, for example. Um, this is important in case some disaster strikes and that region goes offline. It's important that these regions are at least 300 miles from each other. This approach also allows for the replication of resources, such as virtual machines and virtual machine storage, across a geography that helps reduce the likelihood of interruptions due to events such as natural disasters, civil unrest, power outages, or physical network outages affecting both regions at once. Example of region pairs in Azure are US West paired with US East. So then you would have also in Asia would be Southeast Asia paired with East Asia. This will also uh, show or help you create better and more robust solutions. Within a region, you will have um, availability zones. Availability zones are physically separate locations that exist within an Azure region. Typically, availability zones consist of one or more data centers, each using power, cooling, and networking that is independent. So now this is where Azure is kind of giving more availability to their regions and to their data centers. Um, the way how it started, it used to be one Azure region. It used to have one or two data centers, and that was a few years ago. But now they would have multiple data centers, and then within those data centers, you would also have um, zones that are completely separated and that are connected to a different grid in case of a disaster and in case there's some patching that's going on or in case um, better disaster recovery can be suited. Um, so it just gives more flexibility for your resources not to be impacted. Okay, this will look much easier and better when I show you and demonstrate that in a demo rather than just talking about it in theory. But if you have this picture in mind, this will help you out understand how this is structured. All right, so with this, we're coming to the end of this theoretical part about the regions in Azure overview. What we have covered here from the top is some Azure history. We have covered shared model, who's responsible for what in an Azure data center, and how that whole journey took place. Also, we have covered some Azure regions and how they are separated in paired regions and how's that also helping a user or a customer have more robust solutions. With this, look for video number 4 that I'll be releasing soon. If you have any questions or comments, please publish them in the comment section below. I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you for watching and see you soon. Bye.